Thomas, if you don't mind, I don't want to do Trump tweets today.
Well, that's okay. There's so much news out there, Betsy. I understand you have some questions, though, and you pulled me out of the conclave to come out. I had to leave my cheesecake half eaten to come out here to answer some questions. Well, I can't wait to hear these questions.
Okay, well, I do. I have them all written down. Now, this is real important for everybody out there. We appreciate the Trump tweets, and it's all well and good. But, folks, we got to help the Brits. The Brits are in a world of hurt, and they don't have anything to fight back with other than, going out and protesting, because even their kitchen knives are considered weapons at this point. But we have to show you how the British are enemies of America. I will say not the British people, but the monarch, your Privy Council, your MI6. And we've shown this. We're going to show it. Thomas is going to elucidate this in a way that you will never see it differently again. So the British monarch must be taken down by the United States. Thomas, is that an outrageous statement?
No, it's long overdue. The British monarchy is one of the oldest institutions on the earth that is one of the worst and the most corrupt, basically taking their warlord corporate stand from the British East India Company and people like Cecil Rhodes. And we've pointed out the 100-year propaganda that started the minute that the Brits were able to steal patents from America, from Nikola Tesla and many others all around the world, create cardboard cutouts like Marconi, and basically control technology for the purpose of war, propaganda, manipulation, psychological manipulation, and basically making sure that the standard person is always involved in a war, either starting one, getting over one, finishing one, paying for one, getting ready to pay for the next one. That's what it's all about. That's the British monarchy, nothing but war. Their history is nothing but capricious wars created by monarchs who believe that they are divinely inspired, and they are not.
Okay, well, so that's a lot of the history that people will have read about and will see on YouTube. But now we're going to take it current day, and we're going to show you where that history is slamming into current events. Let's talk about Bruce and Nellie Orr's dinner party.
Well, first let's frame this. I like what you just said. If we're going to look at the history of this, we have to look at the fact, let's just call it for what it is. This was a British attack on Donald Trump. And this is what always happens. You use the Five Eyes. In other words, you use one of your intelligence group that you have a little agreement with, which with Britain started in 1946. And they have vowed to not tell anybody it even exists, or even each other that it exists. But they share all this intelligence. So the Spygate is directly from the Queen of England's Privy Council, through Geoffrey Patty, Lord Malloch Brown, Richard Dearlove, told Stephen Halper, who is a CIA rogue agent who has both British and American citizenship. He is the one who got Christopher Steele to go over to his good buddy Bruce Orr, and with 60 contacts, a back channel, that though Christopher Steele was working for the FBI, things were being fed back and forth so that the dossier, we now know, as you point out, because of Bruce Orr's testimony that has now been released, it shows that Bruce Orr had two different dossiers, one created by his wife, Nellie Orr, which was all about the Russians, another one created by Glenn Simpson. And the beautiful part of all of this is that now Devin Nunes, with the release of these documents, can now tell us the whole story. So he's just yesterday was telling the story to Hannity, I believe, on the radio station. And what he was saying is that the same people who did that soccer scandal, the world soccer scandal, FIFA scandal, the same people. And so all they did was they said, good, we'll just take our old agent, Christopher Steele, who was really not a good Russian agent. He sat at a desk. He didn't know anybody. He's not a good Russian contact. So it was now pointed out by Devin Nunes that when Glenn Simpson, the head of Fusion GPS, who helped write the dossier, when Mary McCoby, his wife, came out and said, hey, give credit to Glenn, he wrote the dossier. Yes, he did. I guess he wrote it in the year 2000 when he was still working for the Wall Street Journal, according to Devin Nunes, what I just heard him say, which is part of some of the released documents now. Not only the Orr released documents, but the Lisa Page released documents, and then the Well, the Nellie Orr documents came from Judicial Watch, 339 pages.
And if you're British, hang on, we are getting to the punchline.
Well, this is the setup here.
Yeah, I know, you're setting it up. I just don't want to lose our friends in Britain because they need to have this intelligence. It's very, very important.
So the Brits really did a very, very bad job on Spygate, you see, because Dearlove, he's old, he's no longer in the business. Christopher Steele was never very good at it, and his little company, him and one other guy, they're really nothing. The other jobs that they've done have been turned into scandals, and so they got him, and then they set up a whole group around him. And so this was directly led by Sir Richard Dearlove. And Sir Richard Dearlove contacted Alexander Downer so that he could drop the news about Papadopoulos. They invited Papadopoulos as early as April, to Italy, where Michael Gaeta was being controlled by Gina Haspel, who was the section chief in London for the CIA.
And she is now, for folks listening inside of Britain, she is now the director of the CIA. It's no coincidence she went from the London office and followed Brennan right to the CIA as the director.
But when they do the dirty work, they don't like to do it where they get caught, so they did it in Rome at Link University campus, where Joseph Mifsud was a professor, and basically it's owned by a guy who's more or less a Russian, Stefan Roh, R-O-U.
R-O-H.
R-O-H, excuse me, R-O-H. Well, that's where he's now spelling it, make sure I got it right. I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. Never heard anyone pronounce his name. But he wrote a book stating his alibi and his innocence, and that he's the last person to know to know where Joseph Mifsud was and speak with him, including Joseph Mifsud's girlfriend who just had a baby. And so Mifsud is off the map, perhaps according to Hillary Clinton and her lawsuit which included Joseph Mifsud. Her lawyers consider him dead. But the point is that Joseph Mifsud was set up in London, but it started with Michael Gaeta, who was controlled by Gina Haspel in London, and the Oxford groups, the Cambridge groups, all the intelligence groups, they all invited George Papadopoulos in. Now, these groups already had people in like Nayab Ahmad and Avinder Simbai, who are both lawyers working with the Robert Mueller special counsel. They were there too, with George Papadopoulos, with Joseph Mifsud, and the big setup, trying to make it look like George Papadopoulos was Trump's number one foreign international contact. And they literally gave him accolades, they gave him positions, they created, for George Papadopoulos, they created literally institutes that he became the head of. And Boris Johnson is seen with his arm around him. Cameron knew all about it. It was in The Guardian, it was in the paper. Every week, the British paper ran propaganda stating that George Papadopoulos was this very powerful person. And then all of a sudden, George Papadopoulos, while talking to a British agent, somehow mentions the 33,000 missing emails of Hillary Clinton, which, remember, she lied and said they didn't exist. They do exist. There's a copy with Christopher Wray has a copy in the FBI office. Comey had it. So Papadopoulos, that's a complete frame-up. The FBI already had those 33,000 emails, and it was a crime for Hillary to erase them. Why? Don't forget, Hillary and Bill are the best obfuscators on the face of the earth. When they are guilty, they mix it all up until you can't tell what the real content is.
I want to get to the dinner party.
Okay, so the Crown lawyer, basically for the Queen.
The Queen's attorney, Alison Saunders.
And before that, it was Arvinder Simbai, who now works with Robert Mueller and was part of the 911 cases, helped him, came over from Britain to cover up the trail of British participation in 911, now is in the special counsel trying to cover up the trail of Uranium One and also what Britain did with uranium during that same time, and basically a fight with Russia to get our uranium.
Take a breath. This is so
control.
Big. I know, this is so big. Arvinder Simbai is with Mueller's special counsel, and he is with the Queen's prosecutors?
Yes.
What is the Queen's representative doing with Robert Mueller? And if you look historically, has been with Robert Mueller all this time.
Because the entire thing came out of Britain. So when the first document, the dossier, the early pages of the dossier, which we are the only ones until Nunes now said just yesterday, and it was said in one other document that got released, that they were paying for installments, 17 installments to Christopher Steele, that started in February of 2016. Okay? So from that time on, the Brits were full court press. Stephen Halper was setting up George Papadopoulos, Sam Clovis, and then the dossier was setting up Carter Page and Manafort and Paul Manafort. And so the research that Glenn Simpson had done on Manafort was folded into the whole thing. But the deal is, it was all directed from Britain because that was their excuse. So Robert Hannigan, the head of the basically their NSA, the GCHQ, literally came to America and worked out of Fort Meade, Maryland, which is where the head of our NSA is, and was invited there by John Brennan, who was the head of the CIA. He shouldn't have even had the clearance to allow Robert Hannigan to come into Fort Meade and set up wiretapping of the Trump Tower. Admiral Rogers informed before the Trump Tower meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya, which was set up by the State Department, allowing her and two Russians to come in, but it was also a Brit.
Not just any Brit.
Who was the contact.
Not just any Brit, because you could have had a technician come in and do that. You had Robert Hannigan come over to do it.
Which means it went straight to the Queen. It went straight to the top. It went straight to whoever you think runs England. Here's the deal. There's a monarchy going over there that should have been canceled out a long time ago when the other revolutions stopped the insanity of thinking that because of a bloodline of usually crazy people...
Thomas, I don't want to go down that weed patch, okay? We got to stay focused on what is happening today, please.
We have to overthrow, as you said, the monarchy. We have to get them out of America. We have to stop being the subjects of the monarch. And this is all through the Queen's Privy Council and people like Jeffrey Patty and people like ex-head of the MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove.
So, but let's go back to Alison Saunders and her relationship to Arvinder Simbai and the dinner party that Bruce and Nellie Orr had with Glenn Simpson.
We can
4 days before the Trump Towers
meeting. Because the Trump Tower meeting was the exposure of Robert Hannigan as the number one spy in Britain coming to America to spy on candidate Trump. And in a grotesque way, because he was already being spied on through Manafort's phone and everybody else, but they needed to have all the emails. So, there's only one reason in the world that one of the head criminal lawyers in Britain would come and meet with Nellie Orr and Bruce Orr and Glenn Simpson 4 days before the Trump Tower setup, the frame-up with Russians. They were getting their ducks in a row for how they're going to defend themselves. And she must have been bringing a personal message directly from the Privy Council and or whoever you imagine runs the Privy Council, which is the Queen. So, this comes directly from the Queen. And the reason that this is such a big deal is because when the FISA application justification documents come out, because Trump has already declassified them, when they get redacted to whatever degree Horowitz is going to redact them, when they come out, it will clearly state this is a British spy attack upon America. We will have to end our relationships with Britain now.
No, we need to go bomb Windsor Castle is what we need to do.
These can't bomb anybody except with love and kisses of,
Yeah, right.
That's all we can do. We have to give them so much love that their evil dies, and then, of course, there's nothing left of them.
They are so corrupt, and this monarchy is also what it's doing to the people in Britain.
Okay, let me explain what happened to the people in Britain. Because of George Soros and the rogue CIA that has basically been predatory economics on 14 different countries after a color revolution was established by non-government organizations that he donates to, they're all under the titles of free speech and democracy and Freedom Watch and the National Endowment for the Alliance of Peace, whatever, the nicest titles you can get, it's the opposite. That's what those people are. 14 countries they did it to. They did it also early on. George Soros did it to whom? The Brits. Now you say, wait a second, why did he attack the British pound and basically almost bankrupt England? And this is well known, I'm not exaggerating. He is a member of the Privy Council because Lord Malloch Brown is a member of the Open Society Foundation from day one. Same thing with Geoffrey Patty. When you say the British Privy Council, you're saying George Soros, but George Soros thinks he's above all of them. He's their rogue agent. He's the one who goes out and manipulates currencies so that the Bank of England, which is owned by the Queen and controlled by the Queen, and no one wants to admit that, when the Bank of England gets to basically, through predatory economics, rip off every currency in the world through George Soros, it's being run through British banks. Don't forget that. So when the EU was set up, it was because the British banks had ripped off everybody they could. The only people they couldn't rip off completely was America, but that was all set up because as soon as Hillary became president, that was the end of America, and we would have become subjects of the Queen. We would have become another Commonwealth nation.
Yeah, but Hillary had a little thing up her sleeve that the Queen of England may not have known, and that is that Hillary holds all these encryption keys. So in the end, she was going to lock down the Queen and send her merry way.
And that is the problem. Hillary learned from the Queen by her machinations taught through, the Jesuits and Machiavelli and the Italian bankers and the Rothschilds and all the Jewish bankers from Germany and Holland who came to England and changed their names to make it look like they weren't Jewish. She learned from all of them, and she learned how to put a tax on everything. So the monarch of America is Queen Hillary, even at this moment. Because, as you point out, she's not only got the crypto keys, she does a deal with Uranium One, sells our uranium 20% to Vladimir Putin, our supposed enemy,
and sends
to her
pool boy, that would be Robert Mueller, over with uranium.
To make sure that the yellow cake is good enough for Putin. Because we were enriching it in Oak Ridge here in America, in Tennessee. And then what did she do? She built him a new uranium plant because I guess he didn't think the yellow cake was good enough. So she spent $450 million, I think it was, or around $500 million to build a new uranium plant at their last nuclear summit. So when you talk, but by the way, uranium was always controlled by the Queen. Rio Tinto and the number one enrichment plant in America, Urenco, is owned by the Brits with some Germans and some Dutch bankers. But basically, we don't even own hardly any of our uranium anymore. It was a battle between the Queen and Vladimir Putin. Putin was bragging that he's going to beat the Queen with this Uranium One deal. That's the reason that they gave $145 million to Hillary for getting it through CFIUS when she was the Secretary of State, and $200 million to Bill through Frank Giustra and the Clinton Giustra Sustainability Growth Fund. So that's all. Go back to the Brits. Hillary learned from the British, okay? And the SES, that's Bill. Bill made sure the SES became so strong that when Obama put his 8,500 warriors as senior executive service members, in other words, generals of each agency, they were they were modeling after the British system of committees, that nobody knows who's on a committee, nobody knows who controls the committee, and nobody knows what committees control what committees. And that's what we have with the SES.
The senior executive service needs to be eliminated. Now, folks, I want you to think about this. Why is it that nobody, these news people, your Tucker Carlsons, your Sean Hannity's, your Lionels, your Q's, why isn't it people aren't outing senior executive service? They are the stay-behind army. They are an army. They have infiltrated our government, and they work against us. And all of these players that you talk about that are on the American side, they're all senior executive service. And if they're on the other side, they're crown agents.
And also, like Stephen Halper, he's paid $1.4 million for the election meddling from the British side because he was the go-between, because he was an American, but he's also a Brit. And so he worked with Dearlove. He worked with Andrew Wood. He worked with Alexander Downer. He worked with Mifsud. He worked with Stephen Rowe. He worked with all of them. He was the coordinator of all of this. He would come back and forth to America and invite Sam Clovis and Carter Page to his house so that he could try to get them on tape saying that they want the 33,000 missing emails and that somehow Russia hacked and got them. That's all lies. Why do you think Julian Assange isn't being released? If he was released, he already has said he'll do a plea deal.
Oh, wait a minute. I have seen no proof of life of Julian Assange for a long time.
Well, the Brits might have made sure that he's not around.
I say it's the Queen's dungeon. It's her modern dungeon, and he is a political prisoner. Now, let's get back down to planet Earth here. I want you to tell me
Let's go back to the dinner. You want that dinner?
Well, no, I want to now talk about Gina Haspel, because she is complicit in this. Has she given a full report to the president of what we just gave? Because if she hasn't, then she is a part, in my opinion, of high treason.
Well, one of the first tasks and deeds of Trump was to go to the CIA and complain about the columns in the room. He could have had that meeting anywhere. He kept saying he's going to get rid of the columns. Get rid of the columns. Get rid of the columns. That's the fifth column. That means the enemy. The CIA hasn't been very active since Gina came to power because she knows she's walking on eggshells. She knows she's complicit. She knows the conspiracy should be uncovered by her. She is such a pathetic CIA director that it is only now, after 2 years, that Trump is basically going to go over her head and declare the Mexican drug cartels foreign terrorists so that we can bomb them.
She's an enemy. She's senior executive service. She's hiding the very crime that she helped to create.
She would have been in all the meetings with Cambridge Intelligence Service. She would have known, her job would have been to know what Hayek was doing. Her job would have been to know what...
Remember, she was back in London before she was a CIA director.
That's right. She was in charge at the time all this nonsense was going on in London, the center of where all was coming out of, and it was coming out of the newspapers. The newspapers carried articles about George Papadopoulos and this entire thing, and top people in Britain buddying up with him. And then they tried this frame-up that went on for a long time, but they couldn't get George Papadopoulos to say he had any interest in Hillary's stupid emails. And so they basically then just put the words in his mouth. And then when John Brennan started the Crossfire Hurricane counterintelligence operation in late July, that's a lie. It had already been going on with Comey and the CIA and all of them since December of 2015. How do I know this? Because the new Nellie Orr...
And keep in mind again, people, these people are all senior executive service operatives. Go ahead.
Oh, I imagine Nellie Orr worked for the CIA in open source work. She's probably SES.
James Comey, McCabe, James Baker, Lisa Page, Strzok, they're all SES.
And even in the book,
why isn't Trump tweeting about the senior executive service? Why isn't he calling out these people?
In the SES book, they may not even appear because they have ways to hide all this. But the point is, here's Nellie Orr. Okay, let's go back to Alice Saunders. She's sitting with one of the top criminal lawyers in America who literally has to have security all around them because that's how important she is, okay? But she's coming to have an open meeting at one point and a closed meeting dinner at their house with a bunch of people we don't even know who all they are. Her aides and other people are there, but also who knows who all is there. But anyway, the people who came up with the Russian dossier are sitting together as one of them, Nellie Orr, is creating her section of it, as Alice Saunders is there to represent Spygate, the British representatives creating their version of it and their attack. This is a coordinated attack. Glenn Simpson sitting there saying, I have my version of it, with which I created back in 2000. I've been adding to it ever since. My wife has come out and told everybody in the press. Admit it. Glenn Simpson wrote the dossier. Give my husband credit for what he did. These are her words.
Yeah, I remember those.
And then you also have Bruce Orr, who should be in prison right now for the rest of his life for treason, for what he just did, what he did with a foreign agent who was working with Russians, Ukrainians. Remember, so if Bruce Orr believed this dossier, if anyone believed the dossier, and no one could who had a brain, but let's say you believed it, then Christopher Steele was working directly with Russians. He was the Russian collusion directly with Putin, directly with the GRU, directly with all these people that Nellie Orr actually pulled out of the news. If you look at Nellie Orr's releases through Judicial Watch, 339 pages, though it's redacted, you'll see that what she was doing was she was giddy happy that she was investigating everybody in the dossier. She wasn't investigating them according to Bruce Orr's testimony. That's why the two of them do not agree. Nellie and Bruce Orr's testimony don't agree on almost anything. Nellie was sending messages every day as she was working at Fusion GPS to everybody, the Brits, but particularly Bruce Orr, to say, hey, look at this Russian thing. Look at this. Can we use this? Can we use this? Can we use this? In other words, Bruce Orr was 100% participating in Nellie's creation of her part of the dossier. Now remember, the DNC had created theirs already with, what's his name, Sidney Blumenthal and Cody Shearer. They had given theirs. Remember that to Steele, to Christopher Steele, that Comey had given his, because why? He was working for Comey. When Comey lied and said he was getting ready to buy one of the 17 installments for $50,000, he had already bought 11 of them.
Okay. I know you want to finish, but how does this relate to Brexit and what's happening in Britain?
Oh, but wait. As they sat there at those two different meals, with security, with who knows who, those conspirators were actually working on their alibi for who? Robert Hannigan, who already had set up the hard wiretap of Trump Tower, but they were also there with Glenn Simpson, who met before and after with, that's right, the Russian that the State Department, that would have been by that point, who would that have been? John Kerry at that point, would have allowed 3 Russian spies to come in. Natalia Veselnitskaya, all were on the no-go list, and 2 other spies, Akhnat and the other guy, well-known Russian spies.
I thought Loretta Lynch let him in.
Well, whoever
let him in. Okay.
It was the State Department. The State Department had to allow them to come in with a visa. They had to be given a special visa from the State Department. The Justice Department had to look the other way because they were letting in these Russian criminals.
So they just turned their eye.
And they were happy because they knew about it, because the State Department would have had to inform them. So they knew that this meeting was going on. They thought it was going to be the big frame-up. They had to have hard wiretapping because of the emails going back and forth between the Trump team and Rob Goldman, who was a friend of Felix Sater, who actually set the meeting up. And they got Manafort, who only stayed 5 minutes because he could see that she was only going to talk about the Magnitsky Act. It had nothing to do with giving any dirt on Hillary. The dirt on Hillary was already out. Everybody already had it. The Russians had it. The Chinese had it. Everybody had it. And according to our own government, it wasn't any dirt anyway. There was nothing bad in Hillary's, 300,000 emails. No, that's all incorrect. But the point is, nothing was given at that meeting. And it was the Brits who set it up. It was the Brits who did the spying. It was the Brits who now we're going to blame for all of it. But hello, we now have the proof that Lisa Page says that her text message to Pete, her lover, that Obama knew everything and demanded to be given updates on everything. And that means the committee to impeach. That means Crossfire Hurricane. That means all the attempts to get candidate Trump-elect and President Trump. It was all the worst botch, overwhelming
evidence that we saw. Yeah.
Well, but not hard evidence. It was
circumstantial
evidence.
Yeah.
It was hearsay. It was reports from depositions. It was leaks from good people that we believe in. So we're working with evidence, but some of this we had to speculate on, and we speculated that the dominoes would fall and that everyone who's testifying behind closed doors, particularly the lawyers, would all give their alibis, and those alibis would make themselves clean as a whistle, just like Lisa Page. Whoo, she didn't commit any crimes. Whoo, there was no bias there. And whoo, she didn't. Oh, no, she didn't do anything wrong. If you want to read the worst lies ever next to Peter Strzok, read her testimony. But Nellie Orr her stuff was just, she got a ham radio and started listening to broadcasts from Russia so that they could get some current information, because poor old Glenn Simpson's information was 16 years old.
Okay.
Just like Mueller's indictments are on people who didn't even, that those companies didn't even exist at the time of the election.
Thomas, let's go back to Brexit. We're here for the Brits. For the British patriots, our brothers and sisters. And I have something to say to our brothers and sisters in Britain. You know, our ancestors made it over here. I know I'm a American revolutionary in my genealogy chart. You know, it goes back all the way back then. And my ancestors told your ancestors about the British monarchy. And you said we're conspiracy theorists. Well, we left. And we're here to tell you again, what we told you about the British monarch is no lie. You are subjects to the monarchy.
And when we say the British monarchy, we also say the Rothschild bankers who control the Bank of England. And when they couldn't, let me explain something. There's a thing called the bullion vault. And it's owned by the Rothschilds. And this is the original gold that all of the pounds in England, all the currency in England, all created on this pile of gold. Well, they write 30,000 paper notes on every single ounce in there. So when that happened, and the Rothschilds, who have, there's like 187 central banks, and they directly control like 125 of them or so. Some are controlled by nations, but there are a few still left in what is now the European Union. So when Britain joined the European Union, that was a Rothschild Bank of England attempt to rip off all countries that would be part of the European Union, some of which didn't have central banks, some which still do not have central banks, and some which have not, in that section of the world, joined the European Union. So the Rothschilds and the central bankers went over and ripped off what then became the European Union Central Bank. So the corrupt banks of Deutsche Bank and Swiss Bank and HSBC and all the regular CIA banks that you know of, and the Bank of International Settlements and the World Bank, from the United Nations and all these, they're really controlled by the big bankers, all right? And we're going to release an article on this soon to give you plenty of background on this, because it's not a conspiracy at all. It really does come down to literally a few dozen families that have all intermarried that have bought the asset management companies, and most of them are British. They all came through Britain, through the City of London, almost all of them. And whether they're, Schiff, Loeb, whether it was Streuter, whether it was Warburg, whether it was Rockefeller, it does not matter. It goes back to the City of London, and it goes back to the Rothschilds. So when England joined the European Union, it was so that George Soros would be able to privatize it, go after the central bank once it was established, and all the assets were in one place, so it would be centralized. And that's what he's done. George Soros has conducted a color revolution in Europe with the invasion of what he calls migrants, with his open society philosophy that has permeated the European Union from day one. He was there along with the Privy Council, who needed to get more countries under their banking control, the Bank of England, and really, literally, and they do it through propagandizing, and they're just geniuses at it because they've been doing it for so long. So the monarchy hides the Bank of England Rothschild central banker manipulation of the European Union central banks. That's what it's all about. And any war you see on the earth, ask the question, do they have a central bank? The answer will be no. And the answer is, why are we at war with them? The question is, and the answer is, so we can put a central bank there. Because then that controls all the flow of currency. And once you have all the flow of currency centralized, then the United Nations can go forward with what George H.W. Bush said was the New World Order, or now they call globalism, and now they just, call it the UN 2020, 2030, whatever, or basically Obamaism and all the different UN treaties he signed without permission of the Congress. And then you think about the UN is supposed to be for peacekeeping. They have never kept peace anywhere.
Can we go back to Brexit and May and all what's going on right now?
Okay, so Brexit, what is going on? George Soros blew it because he didn't know that a Canadian company called Collective IQ or something IQ. And he's questioning the first Brexit vote, saying that company who worked for Strategic Communications Laboratories, a British company that interfered in our election through Cambridge Analytica and And basically, the Global Engagement Center paid him $86 million to attack us during the 2016 presidential election. But this company up in Canada did some research, and they had two companies, and they were paid two different amounts, but because they were in the same building, George Soros questioned it and said one company was paid too much that was outside of Britain, so therefore the entire Brexit election was incorrect. So he put out 10,000 people on the street in Britain to go door to door, to literally go and promise people whatever they needed to be promised to stay with the European Union. Do not exit. 10,000 people. He spent untold amount of money. He went on, and I'm talking directly from words he said, which he said again and again and again. Have to have another election. The first one was a fraud. Have to have another election. He had already manipulated that first election, but it was such a landslide vote that they did win by a margin, not a big margin. And then, of course, Parliament is waiting for Theresa May to come up with a plan. She wouldn't even show anybody the plan until a few months ago, and the plan was nothing. She never had a plan. Why was there no plan? Why was Theresa May, to this very moment, no plan? Why, when she goes, it's Angela Merkel who tells her no, and then she goes and meets with the head of the European Union, and they both tell her no.
You know, both of them were Tavistock girls.
Yeah. They were trained by Tavistock. They were basically what
and
I
they
call...
were little girls, too. We have pictures of them.
They were brain bleached. And then they were reprogrammed to Tavistock ideas, which is open society, George Soros ideas.
Tavistock goes back to Cecil Rhodes and the propaganda war that's being played out on the earth today.
And it was the Anglo-American connection that Cecil Rhodes wanted, the connection of Britain and America to rule the world, because Britain no longer could do it. It needs America. And it's fighting for America. That's where they got involved in trying to depose Trump.
We were to be absorbed into their collective, not the other way around.
Right. So Britain knew all along it was not staying with the European Union. It only went over there to mix its money, to manipulate, to give George Soros and the Privy Council and the representatives of the European Union the ability to steal what it could from all countries except two, Germany and France. The two countries right now who have already said that they're going to create an army, a standing army for Europe. Well, that's against all the peace treaties, because look what happened with Germany before. And who did they go after? They went after the French. Now the French are united, so Macron and Merkel are united to create... What did they find out weeks after they made the public announcement repeatedly they were going to start a standing army in Europe? They already had.
Yeah, because we got pictures of the European Union on their equipment.
And that's why they weren't paying their NATO bills. And who is NATO? NATO has a propaganda group called the Atlantic Council, which is basically George Soros and the Brits running their propaganda on America to make sure that the Anglo-American alliance is united. And it's not. We are not subjects of the Queen. And to use the Queen...
Yes, we are.
Well...
Americans don't understand this. I remember when I lived in Britain and they told me I was a subject of the Queen, I was like, no, I'm not.
And here
I am going, oh my gosh, we are.
Theresa May never had an idea. There was no plan. She was never going to leave. She created that plan very late, and if you look at the plan, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's the same thing. In other words, she's staying in the European Union. So her plan... She was going to try to sneak by at the last minute, was to just stay in the European Union and or have another vote that George Soros manipulated where the people of England vote against leaving the European Union.
They were also stalling because they were hoping that this whole impeach Trump thing would eventually pan out. Because in their girl Hillary, believe me, they would have found their way back to power. And then the overall global takeover of the world would have just continued on. There's just been a little bump in the road.
Hillary or Biden would be in office, even for the next election, and that's what they hope. And who's Biden? Biden has sworn allegiance to the neo-Nazis in Ukraine twice. He actually had revolutions where he overthrew Viktor Yanukovych, and the British were involved in that. And Soros, remember, Soros uses the United Kingdom as his home, and that's the reason no one gets to arrest him and put him in jail. He's wanted in multiple countries. He's the Queen's man.
I said that months and months ago.
But he's not a member, and he's not a knight of the Privy Council or a member of her
intergroups. People say who protects Soros?
Doesn't matter.
I say it's the Queen protects Soros.
Soros has attempted to look like he was a predator on English currency. No, he wasn't. The Queen made tons of money off of that. And so what they're doing now is Britain is falling. They went after Europe, and they need America. They got our central bank. They got $25 trillion we owe to basically people who literally came through the city of London, whether they were British, Jewish, Rothschilds, Germans, Danish, Italian, Venetians, a lot of Venetians.
They run our patent office and get all the creative ideas, steal them, and use them for their own reasons.
Every patent goes into a Serco machine that then digitizes it, sends it to Britain, where Serco looks at it, steals what they want, sends it back, and then DARPA and In-Q-Tel, which is basically the military and the CIA, weaponize whatever they can, and they take it from the patent, from the people who actually wrote those patents, the people who created those inventions. And if those people complain, they put them in jail, and in many times, we have literally listed over 100 of them who have mysteriously died. So Britain has always gotten the Queen's golden share on everything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it says the Radio Corporation of America, founded by Brits. It doesn't matter. Name practically anything. It was founded by Brits, usually in Canada or in one of the Five Eyes countries, sneaks into America, puts an American name on it, and then goes into a British asset management company or leaves this country like Hillary's stuff and goes to Shanghai, which again, very British. Singapore, again, very British. China, again, very British. Russia, again, very British. People don't know. The Queen and Putin are best friends.
I thought Hillary was in bed with Putin.
Oh, she's trying to get in between the Queen and Putin.
Oh my gosh.
That's what's going on.
Oh my.
That's the reason Skolkovo happened. That's the reason she gave Putin $1 billion, gave him the Raytheon missiles, these supersonic missiles, hypersonic missiles, excuse me, built him uranium plant. I mean, Hillary couldn't be more in bed with Putin, and she was trying to edge the Queen out because the Queen was kind of in a fight with Hillary for the uranium, 20% of uranium. The rest of the uranium is owned, most of it is owned by the Queen through Rio Tinto, even though it's here in America. Okay? The Queen owns our resources. We are basically like a Commonwealth nation. When we want to enrich uranium until Putin forced us to reopen Oak Ridge, the Paducah was worn out. The Paducah enrichment facility was worn out by the Russians using it from bombs from megatons to megawatts. Enriching who? The Clintons and Putin. It's unbelievably simple when you see this.
Yeah, it looks like all we have to do is go get the Queen's purse. Maybe that's where she's keeping the golden share.
We need to look at the records at the Bank of England.
Yeah.
And you would see the biggest criminality in human history. And then we need to close down the Queen's. Every single island and almost every single United Kingdom Commonwealth has offshore accounts, including Britain.
All them down.
Close them all down.
That's where James Comey and Brennan keep their money. Clinton.
What you say is, Queen, you have $3 trillion in your Cayman Island accounts. You can bring them back to Britain when you show that you paid taxes on it. Oh, that's right, you don't pay taxes. Well, you're going to have to, and we're bringing that money back. And if you don't pay it, we're just simply confiscating it. That's all you need to do to the Brits and the Americans and the Russians. That would be enough to end all taxes in the whole world. There'd be no more taxes for past wars. There'd be no more taxes for new nuclear bombs.
They created the wars. Let them pay off the war debt with the money that they've confiscated from the world's people in their offshore accounts.
That would be one single action of the IRS.
Yes, go get her. And here's the other thing, Thomas. We want to help the British people. They cannot do this on their own.
I'm afraid, I'm very sorry to have to say this, but from watching what's happened in the European Union, I'm going to point this out again, and it seems as if the European Union doesn't even remember this, because their rhetoric goes on praising the migrants. They've already passed a resolution where 24 of the European Union nations say they want all migrants out. They then said how much money they're willing to do so, and then they said how much money they're going to pay George Soros for setting up facilities in North Africa and throughout the Mediterranean to screen asylum seekers for the European Union. So once those ships that Angela Merkel and George Soros, which we pointed out before anyone else did, that were bringing these migrants across the waters, once those were caught and it stopped, but it is still going on to some small degree, once once that was stopped, then George Soros had effectively invaded Europe and conquered Europe. And I'm going to point that out by just saying, please go to the news going on in Sweden. There are so many no-go zones where Sharia law is being enforced that if the police go in there, they get killed. There's hardly a woman who will come out of her house anywhere in Sweden for fear of being raped. The statistics they show are nothing, but basically the government has said that their social service system, which was the strongest in Europe, the strongest socialism in Europe, in Sweden, completely collapsed. Same with any socialist nation in Europe that has taken the supposed migrants who are really invaders. And the other countries that have put up walls and stopped, they are still strong, like Poland and Hungary and the other ones who George Soros tried to do color revolutions in, like Albania and Montenegro, and these other countries that he wanted in the European Union to get them into a central bank to control their currencies. So this is very simple, folks. When the French overthrew their monarchy, the British should have overthrown their monarchy. Same thing with the Germans and same thing with the Danish. They need to be what's called the black nobility, not the white nobility. The Queen needs to be deposed, and her wealth needs to be taken and given to Britain. And then you need to exit the European Union because you are being ripped off by the Privy Council and George Soros, and you didn't even know it. But if you look at you're barely going to be able to come back. But the only way you're going to be able to come back is to do what has been voted in the European Union. Get rid of all migrants that aren't working. Okay? Period.
They're invaders.
And they were truly invaders. I need to keep emphasizing that, especially when Betsy is here. So, get rid of these invaders who are killing you. Look at Sweden. You're not going to last. Okay? Even the wealth of Britain is going to be taken down, and your socialist tendencies, and they have strong socialist tendencies in their parliament, have done you no good. You may be defeated. If you don't exit the European Union and get a deal, a bilateral deal with America, and get some American help, and get America to get the spies and the monarchical Privy Council, old boys club of these aren't citizens, these are subjects. We need to take the Queen's subjects and turn them into citizens, take her wealth and give it back to the people, and use that wealth to get your migrants out of your country. And if European Union can't do it, well, we see the way they're going. Angela Merkel might as well be the daughter of Soros or the daughter of Hitler himself. So, look at Sweden. Look at the socialist countries. Fantastic failure. Look who's done this from the beginning. George Soros. Even the founding of the European Union. Okay? The roots of that were in the philosophy of open society, and that goes back to the British Privy Council. Get the Brits out of America and give the Brits back their money that the Queen stole. Give them back their sovereignty that the European Union stole. Put George Soros in jail and his son Alexander because he's completely complicit. Don't assume that Dick Cheney's daughter isn't guilty, or that Brzezinski's daughter isn't guilty, or that Soros' son isn't guilty, or that Joe Biden's son isn't guilty. That's incorrect. These are dynasties. These are family dynasties. You don't just take off the head. You got to put that whole snake in the jail. So put George Soros in jail, Lord Malloch Brown, Jeffrey Patty, and level the playing ground and start to prosecute these lords in England who up to this point, because they are subjects of the Queen's business cannot be looked at, she cannot be prosecuted, and the people she makes into knights and lords in many instances have complete impunity. That's why they're such pedophiles. That's why they are the number one users of offshore accounts, and that's why they've fleeced the wealth of Britain until it became so low that they joined the European Union to try to find more wealth. That's how pathetic your scenario is. If the Brits don't wake up, I don't know that I have hope that they can, in fact, conquer the forces that are after them right now.
And to everybody who likes it, when we say goodbye, we're going to now say goodbye. And to the cat lady, I'm very sorry that I didn't have enough pictures of cats for you today.